Nelson Mandela is one of the most celebrated men in history. He was a courageous leader who fought for the rights of all people, regardless of race or religion. While his political accomplishments are well known, less is known about his personal life, specifically his 3 wives. In this video, we will take a closer look at Mandela's personal life before and after Robben Island. Thanks for watching the Bongani Men's YouTube channel. It has been said that Mandela loved women and women loved him. He was tall, handsome, well-dressed, and he lit up every room he entered. Yet he was also respectful and didn't speak down to females. He married 3 times, and it's rumored that he proposed to others. But not all of his relationships with women were of a romantic nature. One of the women he worked alongside and grew close to was Ruth First, a journalist, an activist who became Joe Slovo's wife. Mandela wrote movingly about her in his book in his own words, after she was killed by a letter bomb that was sent to her in Mozambique by members of the South African secret police. The bomb also injured ANC leader Paulo Jordan. He wrote, "Ruth engaged in intense debate while we were at Wits University, together, who uncompromisingly broke with the privilege of her wealthy background, who readily crossed the racial barrier that so few whites were, or still are, able to cross, a woman whose passion and compassion enabled others, including those from liberal and conservative perspectives, to play their part. It is a small consolation that her memory lives beyond the grave, that her freedom of spirit infuses many committed to an open society, rigorous intellectual thought, courage, and principled action." One of the women Mandela came to know well from her 21st birthday, Amina Kakalia, told her daughter before her death that he told her he wanted to marry her. Her first memory was of his huge frame and big hands, and humility. She was gorgeous, and she was struck by his formidable, handsome look. Nelson Mandela was widely considered to be a womanizer. He himself admitted he had been sexist, while at the same time also seeking a role as a family man, a father, and a husband. In his final book, Conversations with Myself, he confessed to some of these flaws. In a review, The Independent, London, noted, before he went to prison, he was a legendary womanizer, particularly after he was married. He shamefully neglected his children, may or may not have beaten his wife. He denies the rumors, saying she attacked him with a red-hot poker, was vain, selfish, and young Mandela. He was tall, handsome, and thin, thanks to the running and boxing, which he took up at university. He was a born charmer with natural charisma. Inevitably, women fell at his feet. The one he married when he was 26, Evelyn, was almost written out of his story in later years. They had 2 sons and 2 daughters, and he acquired his first home in Orlando East, a district of Soweto. Evelyn began to complain of his friendships with other pretty women, including Ruth Mompati, his law firm secretary, whom he sometimes brought home after work and who would follow him into the bedroom, possibly not to take dictation. There were other lady friends from the African National Congress, to whom he devoted nearly all his leisure. David James Smith claimed that Mandela was in many ways a traditional African who regarded himself as head of the family and expected to be obeyed. This is hardly a surprise. He also produces evidence that Mandela may sometimes have hit his first wife, Evelyn, and that he had a child by another woman. Evelyn retired eventually to the Eastern Cape and lived on in embittered silence, although she talked to an earlier Mandela biographer, Fatima Mir, saying that Nelson was the only man she had ever loved and that he was a wonderful father. Justin Cartwright went on to say about Mandela, "The greatness of Mandela is not diminished by his adulteries and his desertions, or his inability to demonstrate affection to his children. It lies in his unshakable resolve to produce a fair and humane society for all in South Africa, a legacy now under threat." The author of the book In Mandela, Ruth Mompati, the law firm secretary, referenced by Smith, also emphasized his strengths and does not talk about any intimate relationship with her boss. "I had utter respect for him because he had respect for the 3 of us secretaries, and for the articled clerks and the messenger, who was a friend because he belonged to his boxer's stable. You could see the type of person he was. He was able to relate to people with respect. He listened. He didn't talk down to women. He treated them as if they mattered. Some of the claims about Mandela's infatuations with women seem bizarre. The Mail, London, carried this headline: Nelson Mandela's secret love. Rachel Lundell, mother of Joe Wood, was 16 when Mandela pledged his love. Rachel, living in Devon, had just finished convent school. She was working in her aunt's fruit store and cafe after having second thoughts about life as a nun. One day, Nelson Mandela came in and I served him as usual, but after he left, I noticed there was a letter on the counter addressed to me. I opened it and there was yards and yards of it. It started off lovey-dovey enough, but before long it had turned into something of a political missive all about how he was going to free the blacks in our country. Not very romantic, really. Then, Gertie came in and saw me reading the letter. She asked who it was from, and I told her. She snatched it out of my hands and threw it on the fire, saying I wasn't going to be going out with any black men. Rachel never saw Mandela again. Mandela's great love, and perhaps greatest lust, was for the woman who became his second wife, who is known worldwide as Winnie Mandela. She was a 22-year-old social worker from Pondoland, daughter of a headmaster, and 16 years Mandela's junior, sweeping him away with her beauty, charisma, sensibility, and evolving militancy. As a child, she had been rebellious and occasionally violent, according to biographer Anthony Sampson. Winnie's father opposed the marriage, saying Mandela was already married to the struggle. Soon, she would join it. Their love affair was like a fairy tale. Nelson and Winnie became the movement's royalty, known for American-style glamour. Winnie was soon developing her own sense of theater and would soon appears as the Amazon of the revolution, wrote Sampson. Not surprisingly, their relationship is the centerpiece of the film Mandela, Long Walk to Freedom. Naomi Harris, an English actor who starred in Skyfall and The First Grader, plays Winnie. Her research was thorough, and she came to see many sides to an often demonized woman. At the same time, she said, there were personal reasons that made it initially hard for her to get into her character. I think the hardest thing for me has been that I don't have hatred and bitterness in my life. You know, there are things that I'm definitely angry about, but Winnie's bitterness, for me, is about sustained hatred, and I don't have hatred, and I don't have bitterness. So to try and get in touch with those kinds of emotions, the emotions that one tries to stay away from in life, has been really challenging. I found that I really struggled in the beginning to get in touch with that, explained screenwriter William Nicholson. This is a movie, and it's therefore about people. It's actually about a man and a woman, and wonderfully so. The two stories do tell the history. The stories of Mandela and of Winnie does also give you the story of what was happening to the country through this period. All of the emotional, psychological, political stresses. I decided that the way to tell the larger story was through the relationship of these two. Before they married, Mandela reached out to his friend Fatima Mir and her husband Ismail, asking them to take Winnie under their wing. Fatima recalled, that first time that we met Winnie, we didn't think that she was his beloved. We had a call from Nelson asking us to go to the station and pick up Miss Winnie. We thought nothing of that request. We thought it must be a relative or just somebody whom we have to pick up. At the station we met this absolutely vivacious, beautiful young woman, and we took her home. But I must say I was not very impressed with Winnie. I didn't see her as in my league, snobbish, or whatever you call it. I handed her over to my niece, who was also staying with us at the time. Winnie spent a week or 2 weeks. I don't remember exactly how long. But one day I found her perusing through some photographs which she took out of her handbag, and they were the photographs of Nelson in various postures and poses, and the boxing ones dominated that portfolio. Then I realized that something was cooking between her and Nelson. Mir told a story about what sold Winnie on Nelson. The two of them were in a boisterous nightclub one night when it was invaded by gangsters. Both of them hid under a table until Mandela put his arm around her and escorted her out. She saw that as a sign of his love and concern. They were only together for a short time before Mandela's political work took him from her, first into the underground and then to prison, where she visited him often. Together they had 2 girls, who had an especially hard upbringing once Winnie herself became deeply politicized. Winnie was harassed, jailed, beaten, and banished by the government. At one point, she was kept in solitary confinement and tortured. Her children were often left alone. In Nelson's absence, Winnie became the voice of the ANC inside South Africa, upholding the Mandela name and inspiring women in South Africa and around the world. She became a well-known leader in her own right, one who galvanized youth activism, including the Soweto uprising when, she says, the martyr of that movement, the slain Hector Peterson, was actually living at her house. Later, decisions and associations she made as a self-proclaimed mother of the nation generated controversy, trials, and scandal. The movie does not sanitize her experience. According to Nicholson, that story, the love story, which is a very complex story, is basically a tragedy, and as the demands of the struggle are imposed upon him, it essentially destroys the heart of his life, his love for Winnie. It was to Winnie that Mandela wrote many love letters during his long years in prison. It was her alone that he pined for and longed to see. It was also her who, as he aged, in her loneliness, began to have affairs and abandoned him, leading to a painful separation and divorce. She was in and out of prison and was effectively being tortured. Winnie was put through enormous torments, both physically, sleep deprivation and lengthy interrogation, and psychologically. She was being taken away from her children exactly when they were expecting to meet her, so they would not know what was happening to her. And all of this turned her into somebody who was filled with anger and hatred. And why wouldn't it? I mean, if I had been put through that, I would be filled with anger and hatred, too. And it convinced her that the only way forward was all-out war. And she was coming to this conclusion even as Mandela in prison was reaching the opposite conclusion. You couldn't dream up as powerful, dramatic a conflict as that. Archbishop Desmond Tutu told me about a dinner he and his wife shared with the two Mandelas, who the world saw as an almost magic couple. Soon after he was released, Archbishop Tutu's wife, Leah, and I invited he and Winnie to come and have meal, and when they arrived it was quite, you could see he really was smitten. Have you seen a puppy that loves its master? He was very much like that. If she got up, his eyes were just for her. He really loved her very deeply. Very, very deeply. And it's one of the deepest pains that he experienced, that their relationship should have gone haywire as it did. And so what I'm saying about the depth of his suffering, that it was not just a notion of a thing, it was something very personal. Not to be able to touch his children, always to be speaking to them, with a glass partition separating them, was more than we can imagine. The anguish of it, you saw the cost. Desmond Tutu went on and said, "We spoke after he decided he was going to leave Soweto to go and live in town. We had a very deep discussion, where a man shares things that he wouldn't normally want to share with another man, about what was happening in his own home, and why he had decided he had to leave. And I realized that the extent of his suffering did not end on Robben Island. It continued, and it is one of the most wonderful things that he should have found grace." Graca Machel, Mandela's third wife, had been married to the Mozambican freedom fighter turned President Samora Macheel, who was killed in a suspicious plane crash. She had been Minister of Education in her country and was respected worldwide as a child advocate for the depth of her compassion, for her eloquence, for her sophistication. Like Mandela, she had suffered the loss of someone who had been both her great love and her political comrade. Mandela announced at his 80th birthday party that he and Machel had been married the day before, on his 80th birthday, when a man known for keeping all emotions in check kissed Machel in front of everyone. It thrilled those present. But even as he abandoned bachelorhood once more, he was still known for his flirtatiousness around women. Observe the film's researcher Gail Behrman. Women love him and he loves women. After he came out of prison, if you were doing an interview with him, he would always single out the woman in the group. The movie's casting director Moon Yin Lee told us, "I've only met Mandela 3 times. Every time I've met him, as old as I am, he flirted with me. And it's a natural thing that he's got, and he's so charming. Cheryl Carolus, a grassroots activist turned ANC official and now a top businesswoman, laughed about his flirtatiousness, telling me, Madiba, Nelson Mandela, is an outrageous flirt. Totally outrageous flirt. But very chivalrous, very charming. I don't deal with people who I feel are sexist or trying to hit on me. And I think he can get away with it anytime because he's so charming about it. Mandela is conscious of his behavior and is even self-critical about it now. According to the South African historian Vern Harris, who is the director of Research and Archive at Madiba's own Center of Memory in Johannesburg, he's not a saint. I think for me, one of his most endearing attributes is precisely his determination to keep learning as a human being, to keep liberating himself, even late in his life. So in terms of his relations with and attitudes to women, he was a product of his time and of his context. By his own admission, when he went to Robben Island, he was a male chauvinist, and it took long years of study and of reading and working for his own prejudices to reach the point that it's reached now. I asked Vern if Madiba acknowledges flaws that could undermine his image. After a thoughtful pause, Vern told me what Mandela told him. I'm an ordinary human being. And then he told us something that I think is of crucial importance institutionally in setting up the Center of Memory. He said to us, "You don't have to protect me." In other words, we don't have to be gatekeepers. He's given us a mandate to go into those difficult spaces, the mistakes he's made, and the flaws that he's carried as an individual. Even as Mandela reached out for the affection of women, he was also very ethical in his attitude toward using exposés of sexual relations against his enemies. In his memoirs, Ahmed Kathrada recounted an incident that showed an almost Victorian side to Mandela's sensibility. A Kirkus review of Kathy's book noted, in one memorable scene, Kathrada described placing an inebriated political enemy in a compromising situation involving a prostitute. However, once the pictures were snapped and the evidence gathered, he brought them to Mandela, who, rather than encouraging their publication, helped Kathrada weigh the moral cost of destroying a man's career, simply for disagreeing with his politics. After much reflection, Kathrada destroyed the incriminating photos, sparing the man his much-deserved shame while revealing an instance of rare civility when none was ever offered to him. What are Mandela's regrets? According to journalist Richard Stengel, who worked with him on Long Walk to Freedom, he is filled with them, especially about his family and his marriages. Stengel told an interviewer for American Public Television about a bigger question he wrestles with. He has certain regrets even about whether it was all worthwhile. Thanks for watching the channel.